Should we jump right into it? I'll do a little intro here.
Okay.
So I'm Brendan Toller. I'm the marketing manager of Verso Studios here at the Westport Library. And today we have Brian Phelps, owner of Toad's Place, and writer Randall Beach. They are authors of the legendary Toad's Place, Stories from New Haven's famed music venue. Hey guys.
Hello, how are you?
Good to have you here. If you guys could just set the scene, describe the 70s in New Haven for somebody who wasn't there.
Okay, well, 1970s was a great time to be a young New Havener who's interested in rock and roll because the drinking age was 18, the music scene was just fabulous, and it was just all starting to come together in terms of live music. The bars were full. So as Brian discovered, it was just a great time to be a bar owner and to get live music going because everyone was looking for something to do and willing to spend the money. And the cost of living in New Haven then was pretty cheap. And I was living in an apartment for about $150 a month in a brownstone, and it was just great, and plenty of disposable income. It was an exciting time to be in New Haven.
Yeah, to quote from the book, Rick Allison, he said, you had PLR, Jimmy Koplik, the New Haven Advocate, and local record stores like Cutler's, Rhymes, and Festoons. It was one big organism connecting to this thing we all got to share. We experienced life-changing moments. I loved it.
Right, as you pointed out, you'll never have that series of circumstances again. It was just everything was working together. And it was just fun. We just wrote it. We had no idea how lucky we were. We were in the middle of it.
Yeah, actually, PLR and the New Haven Coliseum and Toads all started right around that same time period. Cutler's was opened earlier, but the three of us had started right around that mid-'70s mark, or 74, 75 time frame.
Yeah, I think POR is now in its 50th anniversary, so they got going in '71, and Toad's '75. Supposed to be a French restaurant, and Mike Spoerndle, who started that with some of his friends from the Culinary Institute of America, realized they weren't making it as a French restaurant on that strip, which was the Yale Strip.
How were the clam baskets?
I never tasted them.
I didn't either. I did not partake of it as a French restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brian, if you could tell the broken window story, how this all started.
Well, I was still in college, and I had started my karate experience in 1971. And by 1974, I earned my black belt. I was one of the early people in the martial arts back in those days. And the owner of the karate school wanted to move to California. So he did, and he sold the school to me, even though I was probably a little bit young to own the school and really not enough years in it. He just wanted to get out, and he wanted to get some money from anybody that he could, and there was just nobody else around. So I took over the school. So I was teaching mostly beginners, and I had a partner there, and we were above the Cutler's record shop. And we were on the third floor, and one night we were just playing some poker. The classes were over. I was a junior in college, and we heard something, smash. And we're looking at each other, what was that? So none of us knew, and I said, well, let's take a walk down and we'll check it out. So we walked downstairs. We weren't rushing or anything. We didn't run down there. And by the time we got down there, we noticed the door, which was a glass door, was broken. And then we walked outside, and sure enough, the sandwich board that we had out in front of the door, which said karate upstairs, that was taken. So now we're all trying to figure out what to do. And so I just said, let's look around the block. Maybe we could find the sign. And if we find the sign, maybe we could find the guy who broke this thing. And I was upset about it, especially because I didn't have a lot of money in those days, and I was still in college. And so I was just getting a little bit nerved up. So we walked around, and before you know it, we're around the corner at Toad's Place that had just opened up that year. This was probably around late 75 or so, mid to late 75, maybe even early 75, somewhere around there. I'm not sure exactly when. but they had opened, and there's the sign. So we said, okay, let's check out. I was with like 5 other guys, and we went inside and we were talking to some of the people, and they said, the guy who took it is over there. So we looked, we said, oh, is that right? Okay, so we walked over, and the guys I was with were rougher, and they weren't quite as eloquent as I was, and they were ready to make some trouble and to kick some butt. So this big guy walks over, and who I later found out was Big Mike, and he was one of 3 partners there. And I explained, this guy just broke my glass door around the corner, and you know, we're going to talk to him about it. So he said, well, why don't you hold on? Let's get the cops in here. So they grabbed him, arrested him, and then I went and talked to Mike a little bit. He goes, here's my card. And he said, why don't you just come on in? Anytime you want, you get in for free with this. I said, okay. So later on, I came in and talked to him some more, and we became friends. And next thing you know, we were tight, and we had a good relationship, and things moved on from that point.
Shifting it back just a little bit, do you think, this is kind of a philosophical question for you, Brian, do you think, I know that you've studied martial arts for most of your life.
Right.
Do you think any part of that philosophy has helped you in showbiz, which can often be crazy personalities, you know?
It has helped to a certain degree at trying to keep my emotions intact and remain relatively calm. You know, there's a couple of different sayings in the martial arts. One is Miju no Kokoro, and it means mind like the water, where the water is clear and flowing, you know, and you can adapt to situations. And also Suki no Kokoro, which means mind like the moon, where like the moon shines down on everything. And so when you're in a building, you can basically see everything around you without looking at it. Like a quarterback on a football team, if he's fading back, you know, he's got an idea where everybody is that's coming at him and everyone is that's blocking for him. So he's got this mind like the moon. So these 2 minds helped me in everything I had to further do at Toads and keep me in check as far as overreacting to certain situations.
Talk about Big Mike, guys.
Well, Big Mike was a force of nature, and he really was very big, and he was just charismatic and had this wonderful smile. He knew how to take the bands in and keep them happy. Whatever they needed, he would provide it to them, and they would develop a loyalty to Toads because he knew how to take care of them. He was a good time guy, and that actually led to his downfall because he liked to drink with the bands, and then he partake of drugs with the bands. And whereas Brian, as he's told me one night, realized I don't even want to drink on the job. I want to remain sharp and be able to do my job right. And so there you have the divergence of one guy who became an addict and died at age 59, and here's Brian who continued the business and been at it ever since. But it was very sad to see what happened to Mike Spoerndle.
Yeah, I mean, that says a lot about him. He was charming. I think that's a good word to describe him overall, and he definitely had a magnetism about him. And that's what attracted me when I was talking to him. He just knew how to talk to people and act as that magnet. And next thing, people would know they'd be friends with him, whoever they were. And it was a big plus for Toad's Place throughout most of his career there.
If you guys could talk about one of the early bookers there, Peter Menta, and the Shabu connection.
Well, the Shabu was up in Willimantic, way up in the rural part of the state, but Peter, who was a musician himself, played in a jug band and still does.
Still does, yeah. He showed up at a couple of our gigs.
Oh, no, he's all over the place. But he knew the music and he knew blues too, and so when he'd see someone coming in like, was it Coco Taylor or?
Probably, yeah, she was one of them, yep.
John Lee Hooker, he would say, well,
Yep.
no, if they're in the state, maybe they want to come down and kill 2 birds with 1 stone and play at Toads after they play at Shabu. And So he was the original booker at Toads, who would help bring in the bands and cultivate relationships and start to build an audience. And that was like really 75, 76.
Yep.
He was important.
Yeah, you guys kind of started with the legends. Like, I didn't realize Willie Dixon, Bo Diddley, Muddy Waters, they all played there. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the original blues guys from way back when. And later on, we even did the King of the Blues, B.B. King. And some of the other guys that followed thereon, like a Stevie Ray Vaughan, who was a few years later. But we had so many of those early blues guys, because that's what was out there. That's what was hot, and that's what people wanted to hear. And I heard them all, I think, pretty much during my time there.
Specifically the late 70s, punk bands from New York would use Toad's Place as like a traditional New Haven place. You go outside the city to test it out in the heart of the country, right? I mean, Ramones, everybody from that camp says that was the first place they played outside the city. But you had Ramones, Blondie, David Johansen, Talking Heads. So talk about that connection and the emergence of punk in the late 70s, I guess.
Right. What happened was we were having a problem with some of the biker gangs back then. So I thought that anybody wearing a motorcycle jacket was a rougher guy, and we were worried, we'd have to, get ready to do battle. So all of a sudden we see all these people with motorcycle jackets on coming in to see this band, and oh my God, we are going to have such a serious problem here tonight. And at some point I noticed that most of them were wearing sneakers, which the bad biker guys, they don't. They wear like boots, big boots, and and rougher stuff like that. So that was a little bit odd. But they came in and they were the gentlest crowd you could have. So it was pretty ironic that they were dressed up like this, but their mood was totally different, and it shocked me, and it was a whole new thing for me. I didn't really know what the music was and what the movement was all about, and so I had to learn as I was there about all these things. And actually, who had helped on this scene was Catherine, because she was really into that scene.
Catherine Blossom, one of the first
talk about
bookers.
her. Yeah.
She knew the music, and what was funny, you had to deal with what the contracts and what everybody wanted, and the Ramones always wanted the Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink. No, never any alcohol. Just give us the Yoo-Hoo backstage.
That's it. That's exactly right. All the bands had writers. Now, Muddy Waters, we go back to him before we forget. He had Piper Heidsieck champagne. He had to have that. So that was the first writer requirement that I remember, and that was prior to the Ramones and Yoo-Hoo, which came later on. But everybody has their own writers, and they have their own things that they want. A lot of them are general, like the punk rockers would normally be beer and pizza. I mean, that was a cheap way out, and it was good for us, and they didn't complain. So they were happy just to have a place to play a gig. So we would go the beer and pizza route for writers, and then as we were going through it, and I say Catherine was helping us find some of these bands or bringing the right ones to our stage. We learned more and more about them as time went on, and then we hit some big ones, like, as you said, the Talking Heads. I didn't know who the Talking Heads were. Talking Heads. I mean, these a bunch of heads? What are the Talking Heads? And then they had the full original band was there, and they're doing their thing, and I'm watching David on stage, and man, this guy's a little, he's got his own way about him, So I was watching him, then I see this
Psycho killer.
Yeah.
Just go say fa fa fa.
Yeah.
Fa, fa, fa.
It just, he definitely had his own way about him, and then they had his backup band, or not his backup band, but the rest of the Talking Heads, all of whom were interesting. You had Tina, of course, who was a very attractive blonde there on stage with him, and next thing you know, they just took off, and they sailed to stardom right from there.
Yeah, Peter Menta has a funny story he told me about not bringing the right champagne to Muddy. he got some New York champagne or something, and Muddy looked and said, oh no. And he had this guy go back to the hotel and bring him his emergency bottle. But then he did a really nice thing. He sat down with Peter and said, now you're going to taste some real champagne, and you'll see why I require this. And so they sat and drank champagne together, drinking champagne and Muddy Waters, and telling the stories and stuff. So that's part of the intimacy of Toads, and things like that can happen backstage at a small club. Where
Personal touch.
We even had a thing with Muddy where this was like one of the last times that he played. And we were in the dressing room, and we brought in these puppet people from NBC, the Muppets. That's what it was, the Muppets. And so I heard the Muppets were talking to him, you know, and they had a thing going on, and Muddy was loving this. And so he looks over at him, and because they were saying their little spiel that they had going on, you know, to the Muppet, you know, and then the Muppet came back with a perfect answer. I can't remember exactly what it was, and then he was laughing so hard he started to stamp his feet in place, stamping his feet, and he actually started crying. And his wife was there that night. I think this could have been the last time that he played, and it was just like watching him there do this. It was really, I mean, really emotional and moving to see Muddy in this state, but he was so enjoying himself with the Muppets doing that.
Amazing. We talked about Catherine. Talk about Lucy Sabini.
Lucy was there before Catherine, and she was there for I think maybe 2 or 3 years. I can't, you know, the years run by. I can't remember. It could have been more, but she was there and took over for Peter Menta. I'm not sure why he had to leave actually, but he was out. She was in, and she was still learning the job as well. So she had to talk with the agents. And even the whole concept of touring was still somewhat new. You know, in order for a band to tour, you have to have a number of venues in cities that are within driving distance of one another. And prior to this, if you look at it, you really didn't have a lot of that going on. You know, you had some of it going on, but not enough to make it worthwhile for a lot of bands to be able to afford to do this. And so Lucy now comes in at a time when the bands were able to get agents and establish tours, and we were able to become involved in the circuit. You know, so they would play clubs along the East Coast and finish up or start either in New York or Boston, and we were right there in between the two. So we were in the perfect location in a separate market, so we weren't competing with the other cities, and still a perfect driving distance from the next market that they were going to drive to. So she came in right at that time and was able to book bands moving through, and she was aided by Jim Koplik as well. You know, he would be talking to her on a regular basis, as well as Mike. Mike was involved in the booking in those days too. So he was right up there with her, helping to route the bands through New Haven, so we could score them after they were coming from one of the major markets. New Haven was never a major market, but because of our location, we were still able to score these bands that might only be looking at big cities.
You mentioned him. Talk about Jimmy Koplik.
Yeah, he was the man. In Connecticut, Jim Koplik has always been the man. There's no question about it. He started the whole thing of bringing in major rock and roll bands, working with PLR. He would buy a series of spots on PLR. You would hear that spot every 5 minutes. He would buy so many spots. And he started out with a partner, Shelley Finkel, and their corporation was called Cross Country Concerts. And he actually did some major shows like Watkins Glen, several others, and big shows. And then all of the concert promoters started to develop their own little areas, like the Mafia. You know, you had Frank Russo, who was over in Rhode Island, and Don Law, who was up in the Massachusetts, Boston area. You know, and then you had people from all different cities that had their own little area. And Jim's was the Connecticut area, so that's where he was allowed to book bands. That was it. So the agents would talk to only him. You know, once in a great while, you might have somebody trying to compete, but but almost to no avail, because he was the guy who brought him in. And he continued straight on through doing this until he eventually took over the Oakdale Theater and turned it into, from a tent into a major playing arena. And then the Hartford Meadows, I think it was originally called, to different names, and then they renovated it and they call it whatever name, who's ever sponsoring it for a certain number of years, whether it's the Comcast Theater or whatever. So he got a hold of those two, and so he was booking the Hartford Civic Center and New Haven Coliseum until it got torn down, and those two venues and any other major venue in the state. So he was the guy that was doing rock and roll, and he was and still is the premier person in the state of Connecticut. Just he's the king. Basically, if you had to put a crown on somebody's head, he's the king. He's the one who brought most of the major acts to Toads. From the Stones to Billy Joel and Bob Dylan and David Bowie and Santana and on and on and on. Jim Koplik was the one who had the relationship with the managers and the agents, and he would bring them to do a smaller gig. Bon Jovi was another one. I mean, there's just so many of them. And they would say, well, we're thinking about doing a gig, Well, there's only one place here. It's Toads. So he would bring them right into Toads. And so he was always right there for us to help us get stuff right.
Talk about how, Brian, I assume you wanted to write a book, and you maybe phoned up Randy, or how did it work? How did this partnership happen?
Well, yeah. Basically, I was thinking about it for a long time, and I had all these stories in my head, and I wanted to get them out. And I really didn't know anything about book writing. I haven't been a literary person really, but I had the stories, so I had the knowledge of what happened. So I figured, at one point I just said, let me get this down. So I started to get it down on paper, and then I'm thinking about who's going to help me with this. So I saw some advertisements for ghostwriters, and there was some group that looked like it was a good group. At least it sounded like it was a good group on paper. And I called them up, and it said, Joe Smith and Henry Wallace and Jane Doe, all these people, and then I'm talking to them, and they were all from India. So I didn't have anything against people from India. It's just that they really weren't the right ones that I wanted to help me. They were, I started by giving them some information for chapters, and they would give me back some stuff, and I'd have to myself, who's not even a literary guy, would have to re-edit their stuff. And I'm looking at it, you gotta be kidding me. So then we're thinking about pictures. So I called up Randy and I asked him, you've been in the business for a long time taking pictures. Do you have any pictures? And he said, no, but I wouldn't mind getting involved in this. So it took me about 1 second to think of, what, if you want, I got a job, it's right here, because these other companies, for some strange reason, they're gone. And so you got it. And so we got together right at that point, and then we started to set up some meetings, and we put our partnership together, and we just sailed from there. It was a no-brainer, I can tell you that much.
Well, and Randy, you covered the scene for so long.
I said that even though at that point, I was no longer doing rock and roll reviews, I said, I've got it all. I have memories of those nights. I even have my original clippings at home in a box in my closet. I can pull all that stuff out.
All right, so I'm just gonna name some stuff, and you guys will tell me about it. So talk about the Springsteen Coliseum show. They played after or something like that, right?
Yeah, he played a killer show at the New Haven Coliseum, which I did see, and 3.5 hours, and so energetic. And 1978, so he was really hitting it, and people, of course, loved the show. And I'm still angry at someone at the New Haven Register, who told me the next day, oh man, yeah, we went to the Coliseum, then he came over to Toads and got on stage. I said, why didn't you tell me Springsteen's coming to Toad? What? So that was one of the few big shows that I missed at Toads. But we had you had Beaver Brown in that night, And Beaver
Right.
Brown, big Springsteen fan, and he had the gumption to get down to the Coliseum during the sound check and approach Springsteen and say, hey, think you could stop by Toad's place and play with us later tonight? And Springsteen said, oh yeah, sure, why not?
U2 opens for Beruga.
Yeah, who remembers Beruga?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about Beruga? Whatever
No.
happened to them?
No.
I'd never heard of them.
Now, basically, yeah, Beruga. I mean, it sounds like the gum, the bubble gum, right? Bazooka, you know. But no, I know they were playing with them, and there was some confrontation between Bono and the singer, I think from Beruga, and I'm not sure what it was, or one of the members, and there was some loud stuff going on stage, but it was taken care of, you know, by themselves. I think they were doing a bunch of dates with Beruga, so they all knew each other, and nobody was popular. Nobody knew either band, actually, at the time. So it was common for bands most bands are kind of emotional beings, you know, so they can really get agitated and loving, you know, both extremes, you know. So when stuff starts to happen, they could really tear into one another, and 10 minutes later they could be hugging one another. So there was something going on there, but they eventually got it worked out, and both bands played, and there was less than 100 people there for that time. U2 eventually played 3 times for us, and the last of which was a good night where we, I think, came close to selling out. But that was in the early 80s, just before they broke, and the last time they were just starting to break. And then from there, everything was history.
And I think that was their first show in America too, right?
Yeah.
It was Toads.
Yeah, it was.
One of my probably top 3 favorite bands, NRBQ. Big Al said that Toads is the greatest club in the nation. Talk about NRBQ, because they must have played there tons.
Well, they were called the house band, and they just they had this rapport with the audience because it was a perfect size. Toads is a perfect size for a band like NRBQ, and I saw them play there, of course, and it was one of my favorite nights at Toads because it was such fun. They were having so much fun. The crowd was having so much fun. You always sold out.
Yep.
Every time.
Always. Yeah, we would do them on Friday and Saturday and sell out both nights. That was one of the few bands we could do both Friday and Saturday and sell out at a good ticket price. Actually, the shirt you're wearing would be probably the type of shirt that Big Al would wear, you know, as crazy as that may sound. I mean, that was his thing. And he was in a band called the Wild Weeds before he joined NRBQ. We always had a great time. You know, Terry was on the keyboards, and he was the other leader of the band. He would actually pick the songs to play of the band, and it always was built upon the audience reaction to what they were doing. So if the audience was really getting into it and the band was starting to really feel it, then he would put a better medley of songs together, and then one would complement the next, and it would go from 1, 2, 3, 4, and then after the final song was done, the crowd would just roar, and he had a real knack of doing that. And of course, if he wasn't having a good time, then you wouldn't see one of their better shows. And that's the way they were, and they had their own sounds, and you really couldn't say that there was anybody that sounded like NRBQ. And who loved them more than anybody, believe it or not, was Paul McCartney. He actually flew them out to his house once. I was talking to Jack Rich, who does a lot of the booking for us. He's our national booking agent, and he's been with us for 20 years. And he went with the band when they flew out there, and Paul McCartney was just ecstatic about the whole thing. And of course, you know, the big story happened was when McCartney was going to play the Yale Bowl in '91. Right? It was '91.
I think so. Not sure the exact year. About that time.
Yep. It was
neighborhood opposition.
Right.
This neighborhood of Westville said, "Oh, what's all this rock and rollers in our neighborhood and they peeing on our lawns?" I mean, they'd been through that in the '70s with the Grateful Dead and Led Zeppelin that played the Yale Bowl, and then finally the neighborhood said, "Enough of this stuff in our backyard."
right.
So unfortunately, they raised such a ruckus about it, and the politicians started listening to them, listening to their constituents, that Paul heard about this, said, "Well, the hell with it. They don't want me. I'm not coming in."
Yeah.
But McCartney was going to...
He was going to play Toads.
The night before. So we had it set up. So he he didn't agree to play or anything, but we were going to have him just come and invite him to watch NRBQ. That's all we would have to do. And then at the end of their show, our plan was just to have them invite him up for a song. So we would have a Beatle playing a song. The next day he was going to play Yale Bowl, and it was going to be a sold out night, without a question. They probably would have done about 70,000 people. And again, he was going to come in unannounced. No one would have known who he was, and sat there in the skybox watching NRBQ. And as I said, the plan was to have them wave to him and to say, hey, do you want to do a song with us? And our hopes was that he would just say, yeah, because he loved the band, and then we would have had a Beatle on our stage, but it wasn't the big.
John McEnroe wasn't a big NRBQ fan, though. Can you tell that story?
Right, yeah. Well, John, you know, he's a nice guy, you know, but he's got his own way of thinking and his own direction, just like Terry's got his own way of thinking in his own direction. Sometimes people like that can come together, or they can be separated. So, you know, we've had John come in several times on his own, you know, and just play gigs because he liked playing gigs. So anytime he would play at the tennis center in one of their tournaments, he would come over and hang. And so one of the nights was NRBQ was playing. It just so happened that weekend. We didn't try to plan it together. He just came over. So he asked me, he said, Brian, do you think they would mind if I joined them for one song? And I said, I don't know, let me find out. So I went and talked to their manager, and they went and talked to Terry, who was making the decisions for the band. And Terry said, well, listen, I'm not going to go ask him to play a game of tennis with him, and he's not going to come up here and play guitar with us. So I didn't tell John in those exact words, but I told him the band just didn't really want to do it, and that infuriated him. I could see the look on his face because he was really an emotional guy, and it was just infuriating to him. So I was bringing him around, you know, to over to toward the rock shop. I was going to try and get him seated somewhere, and I said, well, this is their merch guy, you know. So the merch guy said to him, hey, you want a T-shirt? So he hands it to John, and this is after they just turned him down. And John looks at the T-shirt. He looks at this guy and just throws it right back in his face. And I said, okay, let's keep going. But on the other side of the coin, as crazy as it may sound, with John, one time he was playing and he came in, the Black Crowes were playing. So I brought him downstairs, and the Black Crowes loved him. And they were all sitting around the table. I don't know if any of the Black Crowes were tennis players or not, but they were all just having a great time talking and enjoying themselves. But John's been to the club at least a half a dozen times over the years, and maybe more. And you know, we've always had a good relationship with him.
Captain Beefheart said to you, Brian, there are 40 people in the world and 20 of them are hamburgers.
Right. No idea what he was talking about. I actually had, I had a picture of him, and now I can't seem to find it. And he even wrote that down for me on the picture and signed it. And I said, thanks, okay. You know, and, you know, I just tried to bond with him, you know, on what he was saying to me. And I didn't understand a word of it, but I tried to make it feel as though I was on the same wavelength as him, and I shook his hand, and we didn't have a long conversation after that. You know, I moved on, and he moved on to whatever he was doing. But that was that was pretty much it.
It was a very odd show, and mostly Yaleys, and they were kind of nodding along to the craziness. And I remember somebody saying, What are you clapping for? What's going on? Some people didn't get it, and some people were really into Captain Beefheart being there.
Yep.
The Sally's a Pizza Connect. I mean, I think that was a major part of keeping those artists happy, right?
Well, that's first tier pizza, and you know, in New Haven, it's Pepe's versus Sally's, and Modern is nudging the way in to be a part of the Holy Trinity there. Mm-hmm. But as Brian will tell you, they developed a relationship with the Consiglios, right?
Yes.
Yep. And they're at Sally's, so it's always going to be Sally's. Not going to be Pepe's.
Yeah, basically, Mike was really tight with Ricky, even though he knew the whole family. You had Ruthie and Bill, Bobby, and Flo, the mother, and the father. Actually, and the whole family did their 50-year anniversary at Toads. And yeah, with them, all the bands that we thought were up and coming, and the ones we really liked especially, we would get them Sally's Pizza.
I think Christine Ullman told me that when the Sally's arrived the first time, I said, "All right, now we've made it here, Toads. now we're in Lake Flint here.
Yep.
Right.
We got the Sally's."
Yep.
So the Stones show, there's things in the book that I mean, I've heard so many people. I live in New Haven, so people talk about this all the time. But you know, this band Sons of Bob opens, and then I didn't know that Daryl Hall and Joey Ramone showed up for the show. But talk about the whole show, how it got booked, what it was like. I mean,
oh, where to begin, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, well, again, you credit Jimmy Koplik for when the Stones were rehearsing their Steel Wheels tour in August 1989. They were up in this little town called Washington, Connecticut, up in the Northwest Hills at a girls' school, and they hadn't played in front of anybody for 8 years. They needed a live audience to test out the material and say, how are we going to go over? Mm-hmm. And so Jimmy Koplik got a call, and they said, well, what clubs should we be playing in around Connecticut? And Koplik said, there's only one place, and that's Toads. And that got the ball rolling, and it took a lot of secrecy and you know, skull and dagger planning and trying to keep a lid on it, and especially Mike Spoerndle had a big mouth, and Koplik was really afraid, and so were you, Brian, that he just couldn't keep a secret. But he managed to, because I think he was told, look, Koplik told him, if the Stones come riding down York Street in you know, in their tour bus or a limousine, they see a big crowd out there, and they're all places overrun and it's still overcrowded, they're just going to keep on driving. There's not going to be a show. So you've got to keep a lid on this and keep it cool. People got to keep cool, and can't have thousands of people out crowding us around. We want to just play a nice calm show, 55 minutes, and it happened. People behaved. People kept it quiet, and when you got in, as I found out when I got a tip from a DJ source of mine to go in there, and I went in, and I said to the guy at the door, "Come on, son, who's playing here tonight?" "Sons of Bob." "Is that all Sons of Bob?" "Yep, Sons of Bob. You want you to pay your $3 or not? Come on in." "No, oh, okay, I'll come in." And when I got in there, I saw a guy called the Wigmaster, John Griffin at PLR. I said, "Is it true?" And he said, 11-song set, 55 minutes. And then I worked in the New Haven Register. I said, "Gee, I better let the Register know about this." And I went downstairs, and lo and behold, every phone was taped down, a whole line and I realized, I can't get out of here. I can't tell anybody. There were no cell phones.
Right.
So you were there, you were staying. You weren't going to call your mother, your father, your friends, anybody, and tip them off. You count yourself lucky, but you can't leave.
No, that was it. We actually first heard about the gig somewhere around maybe 3 or 4 weeks prior, when we got the first indication. Then we had a meeting in the conference room with them, which is no longer there, up on the second floor with the Stones folks, and then they all came back in and looked at the club, and they corralled the stage, and they were all talking. These were all his production people, about how they were going to pull this thing off, because his stage was probably bigger than all the Toads on his stadium tour that they were about to do. So they were all talking among themselves, and they pretty much got it all together. And then when we first got the date from them, we thought we had everything set, and then we heard that day that they were moving it out 1 week. So that night, the Stones leaked it out a little bit prior that they were going to play. So we had an extra 500 people that came in there for whoever it was we had. I think we had a dance party or something, and they just stayed all night and drank, and we were telling them there's no Stones here tonight, but they didn't believe it. And they stayed to the end, right to the very end. And we were still telling them there's no Stones, and they were still looking. 1 minute to 2 in the morning, they were still waiting, and it just didn't happen because they moved it out 1 week. And then the following week is when it actually happens. And from there, it went pretty smooth. I mean, really no other difficulties.
And Dylan was right behind, kind of, right? Playing that 4-hour, 20-minute show.
A few months later, in January the next year, yeah. And Brian's very funny talking about how he kept going down during the breaks and saying, well, what are we doing here? And Dylan could, can I play another set?
Yeah, that was basically, it wasn't planned. You know, they were doing a theater tour, a larger arenas than we were. And this was just a practice session for them as far as they were concerned. So when they got done with their first set, they were still, they just weren't happy, I guess, with what they were doing. They wanted more practice or whatever was in their minds. It just wasn't exactly what they wanted. So they, said, hey, can we do the second set? Because they started early. The whole night was going to be over quick. And then, yeah. And then this happened 4 times until they got into the 4 sets. And we had to close at 2 o'clock, but we had half the New Haven Police Department there and the officers and the people that ran it. And so we said, can we stay open if we collect the drinks? They said, yeah, no problem. Just collect every drink in the house. You can stay open as long as you want. So we went around, collected the drinks at 2 o'clock, and he kept playing until maybe, what was it, 2:40 or so?
2:20.
2:20, okay. He kept going, yeah. And the last song was that Blowing in the Wind, I think?
Like a Rolling Stone.
Like a Rolling, yeah, there you go.
The 50th and final song.
Yep.
Can you imagine?
Kept going, yep. And it was a beautiful thing, and the band must have been tired after all that, but it was a good workout for him, and it made history for us, and we made his book as well. He mentions it in his book, and it was a milestone for Toad's Place for sure. We have certain milestones, and that was definitely right there as one of them.
Right, we got the good Dylan that night. Anyone who follows Dylan knows sometimes he's just in a bad mood, and he's going to turn the back on the audience, and I'm just playing here, and just.
Well, speaking of bad moods, Eric Burdon, Lucinda Williams, you guys could talk. I mean, it happens at clubs.
He was loaded with tood, and the Animals were history, and he was not getting the love from the audience, and he was just yelling back at them, and I want to be dead, I want to be dead, I should be dead by now. And so they're taunting him, and he's taunting them back, and you don't often see that in any concert. And that was just, things like that could happen at Toads, because you never knew what you were going to get. Yep.
Yeah, he actually took a picture with him later, and you could see in the picture he looked, pretty wasted, unfortunately. But, even though he was a superstar, and, I have all the respect in the world for the guy, he just was pretty wasted that night. The Lucinda Williams thing, now that was a whole different story, because that was one of the oddest things, the way it happened, and the whole thing straight on through, because it was the first time where your favorite band, the Boston Red Sox, okay? Actually, I'm joking. But it's his brother's favorite band, and my brother's favorite band, and we're both Yankee fans, actually. So they're ready. The curse of the Babe is going to be gone, because this was the last game, I think, of the first playoffs series that they were playing. They were getting ready to go to the World Series, and everybody's calling. Are you going to have the Red Sox game on? Are you going to have the Red Sox game on? And we were thinking about it. Well, yeah, we'll have it on a small TV at the back bar. That's all we had. And so we put it on, and then she's playing her set, and everything's going well. It was sold out. It was on a Monday night, and totally sold out. And finally, I think one of their main guys, I can't remember what his name was, he hits a home run and wins the game, and everybody at the bar cheers, and half the audience started cheering too. And actually, the bass player from the band, he was like, well, yeah, because he was watching it from the stage. He told us later on. So everybody was watching it, and she had no idea what was going on. And she sees everybody cheering, and she just, all of a sudden, she goes like this, gives the finger to the audience, and gets up and walks off. So, I'm looking and I'm thinking, oh God, this is not good. So later on, I try to give her a few minutes to calm down, and I get out there and to the tour manager, I explained to him ahead of time what had happened. He already knew, so he brings me out there, and I said, Lucinda, this is what happened. Now, we had her in the past, but she wasn't She hadn't broken yet. Now she was much bigger. I think we did her once or twice before that in front of a couple hundred people. But so I had to explain to her about who the Babe was and the Curse of the Bambino and all that. And these people were waiting, so it was no threat to you that all this stuff happened. It was just that they were waiting their entire lives. I'm talking, these people were waiting their whole lives for this team to finally win a championship, and it finally happened. So I said, you're playing the Orpheum Theater in Boston tomorrow. You know, you really need to just maybe at some point mention if anybody saw the Red Sox game last night and watch what happens. You know, I don't know what happens. You know, I just told her that. I gave her a tow jacket on top of it, a leather jacket. I said, you know, it was great having you. You know, you did a fantastic job, and, you know, went through the whole thing, and I made it a little bit longer, and she was happy.
I know I'm leaning on rock and roll, but you guys have had tons of hip-hop shows, Wu-Tang, Queen Latifah, Chuck D, DMX. Talk about that a little bit.
We've had probably more top hip-hop bands than any other club. The hip-hop bands love Toads, and we've always treated them well. We had Kanye West and John Legend together one night, together. He came right out of the studio, and they wanted his first gig to be at Toads. And that's happened to a lot of bands. Like, they would always start their first gig off at Toads prior to a theater tour, like King Crimson would do it all the time, you know? So now, it started with a hip hop group, so we started using them because they were on tour, and this was something that was happening. And then we started getting some of these bigger names, and we had every single one. Like most recently, Cardi B, you know, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, Snoop Dogg, the Wu-Tang Clan must have played 4 times, and so many other hip hop bands that were sold out, and they sell out. People like them, they enjoy them, and we're happy to do them. And normally speaking, they're very polite when they come in. They don't usually cause any trouble. I mean, we've had Queen Latifah come in, even from the old school days, and straight on through. Even guys like Will Smith, the actor, he came in. It was DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, so they were on tour and they played, and we've done just about every, as I said, just about every hip hop act you can think of, and they really enjoy it, and we show them a good time, and for some reason we've been number 1 on their list, and they don't mind coming back.
In 2004, you installed a hot tub. What were you thinking, Brian?
Right. Well, our agent, Jack, kept telling me the dressing room needs to be fixed up. You know, and up till that time, at least in the 80s anyways, maybe the early 90s, a lot of the bands would come in and just trash the dressing room. So I would always say, and I'd be talking even to Spoerndle back in the 80s, why should we fix up the dressing room? They're just going to trash it anyways. You know, this doesn't make any sense to us. You know, so we'd clean it up the best we could, give it a coat of paint, and so now he's telling me, well, your dressing room is not up to standards according to modern day band dressing rooms, also known as green rooms. So I said, okay. So we fixed it up a little bit, and then I said, well, there's a sale on this hot tub thing. I can get it, and so we had to figure out how to get the hot tub down there to start with. So we had to take the whole staircase out to the basement, and then we had like 8 guys lowering it down, and then we had to take not only the door but the frame to the door out, and the frame to the door to the next room, and then we built the room around it. So finally, after we got it in, nobody wanted to use it. I actually told Patti Smith right after we first got it. I said, Patti, guess what? She said, what? I said, we got a hot tub downstairs. He looks at, I would never use it. You know, she just stared at me with no smile on her face, no nothing, just, I would never use it. I said, okay, Patti, that's cool. You know, I understand. The only people I can remember using it were Guar. And they got in there, and they were just having a great time sloshing around in the water, and it was all green when they were done, and they were just loving it. And then finally, And I said, look, we got, I was talking to Jack again, Brian, you got to get rid of the hot tub. The bands don't want it, and nobody wants it. I said, I know they don't want it because nobody's using it. They're afraid somebody else used it, and they're not going to get in that same water, And so I figured, all right, we'll get rid of it. So the only way we could get rid of it is we actually had to chop it up in place and take it out in parts. And then we totally gutted the whole dressing room, not just that room, but the entire thing, and we rebuilt it right from scratch. And I put about $75,000 into the dressing room, and we redid it, and so it looks really nice now.
I read this in the book, and the statement is hilarious, so I got to read it here and get your reaction. 2011 Yale Daily News, Alex Fisher writes, "Standing on York Street is a citadel of vulgarity that damages Yale night after night. It brings people devoid of class or morality into the heart of our campus and strips normally benign Yale students of their own decency." And that's like an ad for you guys, yeah, really, right?
Right.
It just goes to show that Yale is, you can't stereotype them. There are a lot of different kinds of, some mostly always love the place. But then there's this at Fringe who, and some of them write for the Yale Daily News, I guess, and they just go to town on it, and they got a toot, and they don't mind expressing it, and it's kind of hilarious.
The crazy thing about that was that article got more comments than any other article in the history of the Yale Daily News. I think there was almost 250 comments on it from students, and most of them were pro-Toads. So very few were against it. And this guy, Alex, he actually lived in one of the dorms that was behind Toads. So he could hear, like if the doors opened and stuff, he would hear some music coming out, leaking out, and it bothered him. So
he couldn't sleep at night.
Right. So it must have built something up. It built this anger up inside him that just finally just came out, an internal kind of an anger. And he just vented it to the Yale Daily News, and they closed Toads down, or I forget what the headlines were, but it was something like that. And but they got a nice response on it. That's for sure.
How has it changed over the years?
Changed with the times. We tried the best we could from the early days of when it was a French restaurant to the bluegrass era. That was the Helium Brothers, through the blues, which came in through some of the acts we were already talking about, through the alternative punk rock era. They used to call it alternative music as well. You had the punk music and you had the alternative music besides some of your more classic genres of music. It came up through that. Of course, your classic rock and roll was also embedded in that. And then that came up through the 90s, and then you had the Michael Jackson era in the later 80s that we used in our dance parties. We started the dance parties early because it was in-house entertainment, and it was always a sure money in the bank to help pay the bills. Being in New Haven, you need some kind of a sure income. In New York, you really don't have to. In Boston, you don't have to. You can have shows every single night. But in New Haven, you need something once a week or twice a week there that brings in that steady income that pays the salaries every week of all the people that you need. And then it came through the 90s with some of, just coming out of the rock and roll era, not completely, but it was starting to climax. And then of course, the hip hop stuff started probably toward the late 80s, and it started to gel more as you got into the late 90s, and then rock and roll became called indie rock. They started with that terminology, and the bands changed a little bit. You had some other kinds of music that were that continued, like some of the metal music and the hardcore music that continued on, and you can see it through Nirvana's remnants. And so we got past that era, and then we got into the 2000s, and you got other bands like Kings of Leon that we started to bring in, and again, more embellishment of the indie rock, as well as some of the punk sounds and some of the hip hop sounds, of course. And then you got the hip hop R&B, which is now starting to put a melody to some of the hip hop music, which which is pretty nice, and some of it is done really, really well, and it just sounds just great, and it brought us straight up to where we're at now.
What advice would you have for somebody who wants to run a club, Brian?
Don't do it. Whatever you are doing, don't do it. This is the advice that not only I would give them, but Jim Kopic would give them as well. Don't get into the promotion business. Don't get into the nightclub business, because it's just a hard business and you'll probably go down. You know, we've had this pandemic, and we've seen tons of nightclubs just tank because they just didn't have the backup assets when they were forced to close all over the country. And the group NEVA that I'm a member of, and formed with about 3,000 clubs throughout the country, would have group meetings, and they still do have town hall meetings, and you hear people just explaining how they just have no money left, and they just can't continue to go on. And it's a rough business. It's a rough business, and very few nightclubs can make it to 46 years. When you're looking at Toads, the 930 Club really started in the mid-90s, even though they had a small punk thing going on from the 80s through the mid-90s. Their new 930 Club started around 95, 96, to where it was a top-level club, and, you know, #1 club in the country, as they were voted by Polestar. And then you had First Avenue, who, again, they were there, but not with the same owners. I believe a different family bought it out, and Dana is the person who runs it, and she's great, and she runs the NEVA organization as well. She was the one who started it, and you have the Troubadour, you know. So you have those places, and that are in the country that are still rolling, but most of the other ones have pretty much moved on into something else, because it's just a tough business.
And Brian can tell you, this is what happened to Mike Spoerndle. His marriage just fell apart because he was always at the club. And Brian has managed to keep a sense of balance, and credit to his family for understanding that he's not going to be home at night. He's going to be down at the club. And then what is it, 6 nights a week?
Yeah.
So anyone going in the business has to know that well, your family life is going to be very, very tough. It's going to be hard to survive that.
One thing I wanted to mention that I just thought of this the other day, and you already heard me say this, but you know, in our dance parties, you know, even though right now we orient them more toward the college students, throughout many years, it was basically a 21 to 34-year-old category, and most of the people would come in from all over the state of Connecticut to the club. And during that time, so many people met. Now, Randy interviewed, I think, how many couples did you interview?
Who got married there,
Yeah.
3 or 4 who
3 or
actually
4.
got married
And
after meeting at Toads.
That's right. And which was, I mean, he did such a good job on that. I mean, when I was reading it, I just was like, wow, you know, it really was moving. But, you know, when I think about it, and I hear about it all the time, of people that had met at Toads and got married, you know, you're looking in the thousands of people. And then you think about their offspring. You know, how many people I actually indirectly brought into this world, you know? So you look at it, and some of these people might not realize it. You know, here's this guy from Toads. Who's he? Well, you wouldn't be here if he didn't have the club going. Oh yeah, okay.
So I hadn't broken the sign and led you into Toads. You know?
Right, and that's the other ironic thing. If the guy didn't break the sign, I wouldn't even be here as well. You know, I'd actually give that, if I ever met that guy again, I'd probably give him a nice check, you know, for doing that. And as far as the other kids go, the kids who were born due to Toads, I'd say buy the book that Randy and I wrote, and believe me, it's well worth it, and you'll see how and why your parents got together, and you'll have a keepsake, and you can pass that on to future generations.
It's a really fun book, so yeah, everyone should go out and get it. Thank you guys.
Okay, thanks a lot.